Give everybody a moment to log in and get settled. All right, welcome to Preview Week for Willamette the Pinot Noir auction. The wines featured in this tasting series are small lot bottlings for our exclusive trade auction. Contact Emily at the WVWA if you don't know about the auction and you'd like to learn more. I'll put her email address in the chat. For this year's auction, we're pleased to announce a charitable partnership with the James Beard Foundation's Food and Beverage Investment Fund for Black and Indigenous Americans as a part of their Open for Good campaign. All funds raised on auction lots beyond the opening bids, as well as through the Paddle Raise pledge, will go to the investment fund. I'll put their website in the chat as well. I also want to take a moment to thank our auction sponsors for all their ongoing support. And now I'd like to introduce today's featured panelists. Representing Lot 66, Spencer Spetnagel of Durant Vineyards. Representing Lot 67, Katie Santora of Chehalem Winery. Representing Lot 69, Matt Wengel of Lemelson Vineyards. Representing Lot 71, Shirley Brooks of Elk Cove Vineyards. And representing Lot 73, Tim Jones of the Four Graces. And now I'd like to kick it off to our host, David Adelsheim of Adelsheim. David, take it away.
Thanks so much, Julia, for starting off our seminar today. We have a great set of 5 panelists that I'm very excited to sort of delve into not only their lot of wine that they're bringing to the auction, but I wanted to start by talking about 2018. 2018 as a vintage was a pity break from the prior 4 vintages. And I wanted to kind of throw things open to the 5 panelists to let me know how this vintage worked at your winery. You got to jump in.
I'll kick it off. I feel like vintage, besides the rest of the year, was amazing on our end. The temperatures were ideal in the fact of being able to pick when you want to pick and not feeling pressure by the weather, and just really being intentional about sugar accumulation and acid retention with almost every block that we have at Chehalem. So in my mind, it was a pretty smooth, easy vintage, but you had to be careful too, because if you waited too long, the sugar really crept up on you.
Oh, go ahead, Shirley.
Oh, yeah, I just was going to chime in on that, in that it was, I'd say, slightly different for us. I mean, beautiful vintage, you know, kind of the classic small berries with excellent skin to juice ratio. However, we kind of had towards the second half of the season kind of a simultaneous ripening. So towards the end there, we literally had a veritable crush, you know, in our production facility, which made things really interesting. And on top of that, just from sort of a personal note, our associate winemaker, Heather, had a baby the year before, so she was breastfeeding. So we had a little one with us throughout Crush that year. So so that was one of the things that really sticks out in my mind in 2018.
It was a fantastic year. You know, I've been making wine in Oregon since 2015, coming in on some of the warmest vintages on record, you know, 14, 15, 16, very early, very warm, but coming from California, I felt very comfortable with that. I liked it. I'm very happy with the wines and the wines we produced as the greater Willamette Valley. 2019, super cold and rainy. So I feel like 2018 for me is kind of what I've been calling like a Goldilocks vintage. We had the heat, but not too much. I agree. No real pressure of disease, you know, being organically farmed, you know, that can be a really big concern, particularly in years like 2019. But I am so happy with the 2018s. And I think, you know, it's my favorite vintage of the past 5.
Same, just to echo what Matt and Katie and Shirley were saying, 18 was easy. It was smooth. I mean, you're kind of wondering, like, what did I do to deserve this? But you know, you gotta pick when you wanted to. You didn't. There's some dryness there. And the wines, I think, like even when they're young, they're tasting great. So you know, sometimes you go through vintages where you know things take a little bit of time to develop, and you'll notice you know a couple of years into it. But even when these, even in the fermenter, these wines are tasting really balanced.
Yeah, I can concur with Tim on that. They're so, my word is kind of showy, you know, even in their youth.
Yeah.
Tim, you've got vineyards in both Yamhill Carlton and the Dundee Hills. Were there big differences between those two regions?
Yeah, so we were a little bit stressed. So 2018 we had a fairly dry, it was fairly dry kind of in that late fall and September kind of time. So this vineyard behind me is Doe Ridge in the Yamhill Carlton, and that's one of the things we worry about a little bit, that little shallower soils than in Dundee. So that's
We're experiencing rural internet delay.
But you get the pretty background, so maybe it's worth it.
Yeah.
Well, I also do Dundee Hills and Yamhill Carlton in addition to Chehalem Mountain. I thought Dundee Hills and Yamhill Carlton, you know, on the earlier side, performed really well. We were very fortunate to have irrigation lines installed in those sites. We seldom do irrigate, but we found we needed it. It was so dry. It was super dry. But Chehalem Mountain, you know, easily 2 weeks behind to wrap up harvest. Always a concern at 1,000 feet of elevation that we're going to ripen, but 2018 brought more than enough sunshine to get it all in. It was a perfect year, Goldilocks year.
Cool. Spencer, we have not allowed you to speak so far.
Yeah.
This is your chance.
Lovely. 18 was the first vintage in our new winery on the property, and it was a great vintage to ease into new grapes for me and break in the winery. I'd say a warm year, very dry, as Matt said, but it wasn't overly hot. I don't remember a lot of over 100-degree days that shut down the vines. It was just really balanced, warm growing season. And to reiterate what Katie said, left the picking windows wide open throughout harvest. So it made the logistics really easy. We could handle whatever we wanted to in a day of processing and fermenting. And the vintage really brought a balance of structure and density and grace, which I think is a perfect trifecta for Pinot Noir, especially out of the valley. And this is every sub-AVA and the valley in general, it is Goldilocks. It was fantastic start to my career here at Durant. So I'm really excited to share these wines.
When are you guys sharing with me? I want to try new stuff.
Yeah, Matt, I
Great
love the
winemaker.
word.
I want to try.
I love the word Goldilocks. It's kind of perfect, yeah, because I agree with everyone. The sort of hot and dry start, but then sort of, you know, kind of historically typical, you know, cooling temperatures moving into September and October, allowing sort of that, if I dare say the word leisurely picking window, you know, for optimal, you know, for each site.
Mm-hmm. Welcome back, Tim.
Hi,
thank
Tim.
you. Thank you. I'm out in the country and it's boom, dropped. So
One thing about the vintage that we haven't spoken to is there another Oregon vintage that you had reference to that you think that this is most like? And then the second part of that question is, how will these wines age?
Yeah, I've came up to Oregon in 2012, so I haven't seen a ton of vintages up here. But 18 sort of reminds me of a balance of two that I've experienced in 12, which brought the structure and tannin build that this year has. And 2016 had the fruit forward and brightness that 2018 also has. And so For me, it's sort of a balance between those two vintages, but definitely my favorite since I've been up in Oregon.
Yeah, I guess I would hop on with Spencer a little bit in that way. I think certainly elements of 12, kind of what popped into my head with 18. I feel like in terms of the wines expressing is 2010, even though that year was, I don't know if the right word is anomaly, because it was such a small harvest vintage, and we had the unique year of the birds with all of the issues happening during harvest. But in terms of the way the wines are expressing, I feel like perhaps my word for that is tension. I feel there's a tension that is really nice. Sorry, in my backyard about the background noise. But yeah, that's kind of reminiscent for me.
I would agree in the sense of the amount of energy that's in the wine. I think what came to my mind was 2012 and 08. 2012 definitely had the intensity and density of the wine that I think 2018 is showing, but also there's more of a acid drivenness to 2018 that 2012 I don't think really retained. And didn't age quite as well as I see 2018 aging, where like, I can't remember who said it, but 2018 is showing really nicely right now, but I do see this wine aging really nice because of that acid retention, which was because of those cold nights. So even though the weather was really nice and you could pick whenever you want, it kind of stayed in that 70, 75 degree temperature. So it was this slow ripening, and then nights were really cold. So definitely had more of that colder climate sense to it as well.
For me, it feels like, echoing what one of you said, I think, the 2016s, it has that kind of brooding density that I really found appealing of the 16s, but it also has some of the playful red fruited softer characters that I saw in 2017. So for me, it's kind of between the two vintages, but just like Katie said, tasting through wines, 2012 and 2008, based on just tasting older wines, really feel like we're in that zone.
I mean, I guess I would, sorry, Matt. I guess I would like to ask Shirley and David, you guys are probably seeing a lot more of the older vintages than, I mean, I came up in 08. So my reference point of just understanding Oregon in general is, small. So I don't know if there's an older vintage that this is reminiscent of.
Well, David certainly predates me by a few years, but I guess, one of the older ones for me in terms of kind of the start of my career here in Oregon would be honestly two of my favorite vintages. And so in that way, I agree with many of you about this, being such a gorgeous vintage, Goldilocks, and that 2002, and maybe even 99. David?
Yeah, I was going to 99. There's some differences. The crop was a little bit higher. It was a little bit warmer, but still the combination of the cool ripening at the end and the sort of not having to worry about hitting the exact hour of picking because it was not so hot that the sugars were just going skyrocketing up, meant that not only did you have a choice, but it meant that a lot of the wines that other people were making, you were not worrying about whether you should open them or recommend them because they weren't making mistakes either. I mean, it was sort of a vintage where, God, if you picked at the wrong time, you really ought to look into plumbing or something, because
sort of idiot.
Yeah.
speaking to the ageability of these wines, I always wonder, you know, when the wine that tastes so good when it's young, even the fermenter, I mean, it has so much fruit. You wonder about the ageability of it, right? And I think Katie really nailed it, saying that these wines have a lot of acid, which is fantastic. And I think that's going to show that these wines are drinking really well young, but that acid is going to help retain that fruit, and it's going to add to that ageability of these.
Yeah,
I hear that so much about, like, you know, and I'm glad you bring that up, but like, you know, when we're tasting people on current releases or just releases, like, it's so giving now, where's this going to go? And this facade that they think that it's just going to fall apart because it's giving now, it can't possibly, it's going to peter out like a star, you know, a shooting star. But I've seen quite the opposite, that these wines can go the long haul. And, you know, Pinot Noir is an acidic grape, and you know, we're getting texture out here. So you have tannin, you have acid, you have modest alcohols, you have the perfect concoction and character to go the long haul. You know, even young vineyards I'm tasting 20 years in bottle and are quite nice. I mean, it's incredible what the ageability of Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley can do.
I totally that, and I just want to hop on because this has been one of sort of my fun play words when I'm out showing wines. Is my buzz phrase is Oregon does acid. So I just, you know, that's what keeps these wines, you know, alive and vibrant.
Yeah.
I like that phrase.
Thank you for giving us a feel for the 2018 vintage. Remember, attendees, that all the wines in the auction this year are from one vintage, 2018. This is kind of a spectacular opportunity, and in some ways a very sad opportunity, because we aren't all in a room tasting each other's wines and being able to taste the expanse of what this vintage is giving us in terms of these auction wines. And yet, going back to the point I made before, there aren't any mistakes here. You don't have to worry about buying something that is going to fall off the end of the universe in 4 or 5 years. These are wines that are amazingly scrumptious today, and yet will be around 20 and 30 years from now. Why don't we go through the winery that you represent, the lot that you prepared for this auction, starting, Spencer, with you, lot 66 from Durant.
Lovely. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Spencer Spetnagel of Durant Vineyards. My lot 66, Synergy. 2018 was my first vintage at Durant Vineyards, but we have vines dating back to 1973. The Durants were early grape growers in the Willamette Valley. Their first block, 1973, they expanded that in 1984. They started with 16 acres, and throughout the last 47 years, they've piecemealed the property together and bought adjoining pieces of property as they've come up for sale. And now the estate is 135 acres. We have 68 acres under vine. We have 17 acres under olive trees too, and make olive oil in the Willamette Valley. So they're the true pioneers of the area. They were mostly growers and sold all the fruit to lots of different wineries throughout the years. And they started a brand in 2003, but it was made offsite by friends of theirs and other winemakers that they've known through the years. They finally decided to build a winery for the 2018 vintage. And luckily, my wife and I were moving up to Portland in 2017. And I suckered them into hiring me a year early so that I could design the winery. And it's just been an amazing time so far. The 2018, like I said, is the first vintage for me. And truly, this is the first year that we've blended a wine. Typically, Durant Vineyards is 100% block designated, clonal designated wines. You know, I make 5,000 cases, but I have 10 different Pinot Noirs, 3 different Chardonnays, a Sauv Blanc, a Gris, and some Rosé. So a lot of really small lots, you know, most everything's 150 to 300 cases. And so we focus on very, very site specific and pick apart clones on different rootstocks, on different aspects, at different elevations, and soil types throughout the vineyard. And it's amazing what Pommard on our property does from 600 feet to 300 feet. And so the 2018 is 66% or 67% of our oldest vines, our Bishop block, and 33% from one of our youngest blocks, which is Olivia Grace, planted in 2007. And so this is the synergy of the oldest vines that are the most complex and most elegant typically, and some of our youngest vines to bring more structure and a little more excitement from the Olivia Grace. So it's 100% Pommard. It's about 30% whole cluster ferment. These are both from single ferments that were 3 tons in size in a concrete cube, which I really love these concrete cubes I have. They bring so much texture through the ferment to the finished wines. And then this blend is just basically my favorite barrel from the Olivia Grace and my favorite barrel from the Bishop ferment. And then just a third and 2/3 from the Olivia Grace and Bishop. The finished product this year is typical Dundee Hills. It's beautiful red fruit, grounding earth tones, a gorgeous spice box character, and really has the tannin build that I don't always get off the property, and I think will lend itself with the acid to a long time aging in the cellar. I'm really, really thrilled to start this project for the Durants and have the opportunity to see what this vineyard can do over the next 30 or 40 years.
Congratulations, Spencer. Look forward to tasting it.
Thanks.
Sounds great, Spencer. Thanks. Let's move on to Katie Santora from Chehalem Winery.
Hi, everybody. I'm Katie. I just want to quickly say this is a pretty weird time, obviously, with Corona, but how amazing that we get to sit and really talk with each other. I don't really get to talk or hear how all of the panelists on here talk about their wines, so it's pretty special in my mind as well. I really liked the grounding earth tone, Spencer. I liked that word. That was pretty awesome. Anyway, I am Katie Santora at Chehalem Winery. I've been at Chehalem since 2012 and got promoted to winemaker in 2018. So like Spencer, this is my first vintage. But Chehalem has been in the valley for a really long time. So it started in 1983 when Harry Peterson Nedry planted the first vines up on Ribbon Ridge. And then from there, it's evolved into a 3-estate vineyard and winery. In 1990, it was the first release of our first vintage from Ridgecrest. And then in 1993, Bill Stoller joined, co-ownered with Chehalem, and in the next 5 years started Stoller Vineyard and then also bought Corral Creek Vineyard, which is where the winery is today. Corral Creek is the blend that I decided to go, or the vineyard that I decided to make this wine from. In the past, it's come from Ridgecrest, which is always really dense and beautiful. But what I really love about Corral Creek is that it also was planted in the 80s, but by a couple of doctors, Dr. Hausen, and is just really a delicate, pretty Pinot. So as we were talking about in 2018, how the vintage was really spectacular in picking, I feel like it encompassed a lot of the floral characteristics that can come from this vineyard. And also it's our most acid retention, that vineyard in general. And so that's Valley of Flowers. Sorry, what was that? Valley of Flowers is the name of our blend, and that is in twofold. One, Chehalem means Valley of Flowers. It's an homage to the Native American tribe Kalapuya. I hope I said that right. I am not great with not white lingo, so I apologize if I didn't. And also just that vineyard in general has those floral characteristics. So during harvest, we picked this lot. It's a blend of Pomard and Vadensville. It was brought in, and we decided from the beginning that this was going to be our blend. I really wanted to showcase the Crow Creek Vineyard. So we destemmed a small amount of it into an open puncheon. So puncheon barrels are about 132 gallons. And we took the head off of one of them and put the grapes in it. So really small, really intentional. We did minimal punch downs. I'm really liking in small ferments, almost submerging the cap a bit more, so a little bit less structure driven, but more getting those delicate soft tannins that can come from just letting the juice and the ferment soak on the skins. When we pressed it off, we went straight to 100% new oak Sarug barrel and left it in barrel for about 10 months, racked it off, and then put what we wanted for this blend into a 30-gallon neutral oak barrel. So it kind of saw all the sizes of barrel that we work with. Let's see, from tasting it, I really, like I said, I like the floral aromatics. It's a lot of red fruit. I get honeysuckle and violet, but like I mentioned in the 2018, it has an amazing energy and tension to it, while being really balanced with a new oak barrel. So, yeah.
So, Katie, this is up on the upper part of the vineyard?
Yes, it is. It is block 9, so at the top of the vineyard. We picked it all together, so it was about 8 tons that came in, but then really wanted a small amount of it in a small puncheon barrel.
And this is all less soil, so
Yep.
wallwood soil.
Yep, and I don't know, is it news yet that in the Chehalem Mountains, so Crow Creek is in the Chehalem Mountains, and just recently the Chehalem Mountains got a new AVA approved, which was called the Laurelwood District, and Crow Creek is in that now sub-AVA as well, which is pretty exciting.
Great.
Is that news? Was I supposed to?
It is.
Super.
It's out there.
Thank you, Katie. Let's move on to lot 69 from Lemelson Vineyards. Matt?
Thank you, David. Yeah, my name is Matt Wengel. I'm the winemaker here at Lemelson Vineyards. I've been here for just over 5 years. I'm originally from Sacramento, California. Studied winemaking at UC Davis and spent the better part of a decade making wine in Napa, Sonoma, and the Sierra foothills, among other places. So super happy to be here in Oregon, though. Eric Lemelson founded Lemelson Vineyards in 1995 when he planted his first vineyard in Chehalem Mountain, Chestnut Hill Vineyard at over 1,000 feet. Today we have 6 estate organically farmed vineyards. He's an environmental attorney, among many things, but he's been farming organically since day one, which I think is really cool. We have our 6 vineyards span 3 different AVAs: Chehalem Mountains, Dundee Hills, and Yamhill Carlton. He built a state-of-the-art gravity flow winemaking facility that I'm in now. Can't really tell, but it's 4 tiers of gravity flow. Finished construction in 1999. And in my entire career, 15 plus years, I've never seen a facility quite like it. I mean, it's a beautiful and very functional facility, very vertically inclined. And we even have this big beast of a robot upstairs, a mobile sorting platform we call the Enterprise, that can drive up and down the length of our fermentation hall with 10 or 15 people on board sorting grapes, can position itself over any one of our tanks, and literally sorted grapes go berry by berry, one by one into the fermenter in the gentlest way possible. And it's because of this unique focus on gravity that we named our wine Gravity Flows. So we are lot number 69. Not a hard one for some to remember, at least. Enough said there. But Gravity Flows is a blend of two of my very favorite blocks that come from two vineyards and two different AVAs. So the first piece, 50% of the blend comes from Meyer Vineyard in Dundee Hills. It's a small block of 777 at the very top of the hill on the steepest part of the slope. Tends to arrive at the winery early, so one of the first picks. And it makes wines that are just very perfumed red fruit, very beautiful, very elegant structure, and a very notable sweetness on the mid palate. We like to do whole cluster out there as well. I did about 35%, just to get a little bit of nuanced spice and structure. The other piece, the last piece that makes 50% of the blend is Wadensville from Sturmer Vineyard across the street from the winery here in Yamhill, Carlton. I did not know what Wadensville was until I moved up to Oregon 5 years ago, only to understand that 30% of our acreage is Wadensville. It quickly became my favorite clone. I absolutely love it. The Swiss clone Wadensville. It's my favorite wine to work with. Unlike the 777 in Dundee Hills, it takes a little while to ripen, so it's on the later end of the spectrum. So it's two pieces, early and late pick. The Wadensville, in contrast, is more black-fruited, spicier, earthier, and above all, more structural. So the goal was to make something really, truly unique and special. And so we blended these two together. And I think, what you get is just a great combination of the two. Aromatic complexity, but as well as textural complexity, and that's a big part of our winemaking style. From a texture standpoint, I did extended maceration with these wines, about 2 to 3 weeks of extended time on skins to drive a more complete and round extraction. That on top of, there's uninoculated gravity process, of course. 14 months and about 50% new French oak, and unfined and unfiltered, so it's vegan as well. But I just opened it last night with my associate winemaker, Ashley Campion, and we were blown away. I think this is one of just generally our best vintages across the board. So this wine's very special to us. It was bottled in June, so it's a baby, and it's got tension. I mean, it's a spring that's fully compressed and just waiting to get ripping. I let it sit overnight. Finally opened up, but what I'm getting is just really beautiful, pure expression of black cherry with nuanced kind of black and blue fruit elements to it, but just a ton of spice character. We get a lot of out of the Wadensville. We get a lot of anise, white pepper, and like leather kind of tones, and some earth tones from the Dundee Hills. It all really just comes together, but texturally is where this wine's at. It has the juiciness of Dundee Hills and just framed by perfect texture from the Wadensville from Yamhill, Carlton. And hopefully you all that are tuning in get a chance to taste it, but there's only 5 cases.
Yeah, hand it over if you would. I'd love to try a glass.
Yeah, I know that's it's almost masochistic. Let's all talk about something we can't drink.
Well, very cool. Thank you, Matt. Let's move on to lot 71 from Elk Cove Vineyards. Shirley.
Yeah, hi everyone. I wish I could see everybody else's faces as well, but at some day in the future. So Elk Cove and myself, I've actually been in the Oregon wine industry since 1997. This year actually is kind of a milestone for me with Elk Cove and the Campbell family. I've been with them for 20 years. I'm not the winemaker, but I've certainly gotten my hands purple over the years. And we are just a little, background on Elk Cove for those who are not familiar with us. We are part of the pioneering family of wineries that started back in Oregon in the late 60s, early 70s, when people thought it was crazy to grow grapes and make wine up here. Of that group, Pat and Joe Campbell, who are the founders of Elk Cove, were native Oregonians and actually came from a farming background up in the Columbia River Gorge. Pat's side of the family were and still are orchardists, so they knew something about agriculture, at least from a background, and Pat and Joe had really become charmed about wine and grapes from travels in Europe, and so that's somewhat how, they fell into that original group of what I like to call crazy old hippies, David.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah. So that was kind of our origins. The vineyards were planted in original estate in 1974. Our first vintage was in 1977. Pat and Joe and their kids and friends were the workforce in the early days. And, Pat and Joe are still involved, but they handed over the reins to their son, Adam, 20 some odd years ago. And he's been making the wines and overseeing the whole development of Elk Cove. And I feel like one of the significant things with Adam has been our growth in vineyard sites. So, he was fortunate to inherit a really beautiful old vine site where the winery is in the Yamhill Carlton AVA. We're, the oldest vineyard and winery in that nested AVA. But Adam also believed that, frankly, some of the best sites were yet to be planted. And so over the course of, the succeeding 20 years, we've either been planting or purchasing other vineyard sites. So what that meant was in 2017, we returned to being 100% estate grown again. And we own vineyards on 6 different sites in the North Willamette. And farm almost 400 acres of grapevines from 6 sites. So really exciting for me on this particular lot, which is, we called, can you see that? Rock Opera. It's the first time ever we've put 2 vineyards together in a blend, in this really tiny blend. So it's sourced from our Clay Court Vineyard. I would say kind of one of our newer sites, which is in the Chehalem Mountains. It's on top of Parrot Mountain. And it's our only vineyard that we own on Jory soils, and blended that with our La Boheme Vineyard, which is on the winery estate, old vine, high elevation, from the Yamhill Carlton AVA. So this tiny 5K slot is this really beautiful melding of kind of red and blue fruits. For us, winemaking style, Adam is really like sort of the expression freshness that we get from whole berry fermentation. But this does have about 15% whole cluster. He likes to say it's sort of like a spice box, it adds a little something without really, changing the overall conception of the wine. And so 10 months on French barrels, about 30% new. And what I think this wine, as I've already alluded to, this sense of tension, for me, what we get from our Clay Court Vineyard is sort of this punch of that red fruit, sort of that rock element, if you will. And from La Boheme, which, obviously we have a very long history with, we've been making single vineyard wine from La Boheme since 1989. It's always has this really lovely kind of essence of violets and plums. And so for me, it brings sort of the length and like I call them the blue notes, the plums and silkiness. So I love it. I also felt, a little bit of our sassiness about the rock opera. I just have to show you this. Some of the inspiration is this photo, if you can see that.
Oh yeah.
So that's Adam.
Oh my God.
When he was about 16 years old.
No way.
So Hence rock opera.
That is an amazing photo.
Cool. Thank you for bringing that. I noticed that Adam is participating. We'll see how you do when you next meet up with him.
Yeah, let's say I got ownership approval. You guys will see Adam tomorrow on the Chardonnay virtual tasting, by the way.
Indeed. Let's finish up by turning to lot 73 from the Four Graces with Tim Jones.
Hi, I'm Tim Jones, and I'm the winemaker for the Four Graces, 2018 first vintage here. And I've been making wine for 15 years now. Made wine in Napa, Sonoma, and in Washington State. And a couple different thoughts on this. The Willamette Valley is very humbling as a winemaker. So in other places I've worked, you can kind of put your thumbprint on the winemaking. You can kind of direct the style. But Willamette Valley, and this wine in particular, is a testament to the importance of place. You know, you've got this kind of view that nature really place matters, and this wine in particular demonstrates this. So the reason I'm out here in the vineyard is I want to show you, right behind me is the block where it comes from. So I'm you know, out in the rain a little bit, poor internet connection, but I want to show you that this is Doe Ridge. So this is the vineyard, and actually this block 18, is where this wine comes from. And the interesting thing about block 18 is that all of our vineyards are separated. We've got different, you know, rootstocks, different clones, and winemakers, we always kind of separate things and we ferment them separately. This block at the top of the hill is a blend of all of the clones and rootstocks. And so it looks a little funky because there's different growing habits and things like that, but it achieves its own balance. And every year, you know, I'm tasting it in the tank or we're harvesting it, and it's awesome. And it's a little bit frustrating as a winemaker because, like, I want nature to lose sometimes, but it always comes out. It's beating. It wins. It's a great site, and it's kind of like it. So as you're blending as a winemaker, you have your clones that are separate, and you're coming through. And I can't recreate this on my own, which is a really interesting thing to do because I have the different clones separated, and I'm trying to make something. And Block 18 beats me every year. I'm going to say it's the site, but it's really a testament to that. So again, this is a Doe Ridge vineyard. We have a few other state vineyards as well. This vineyard in particular gives us dark fruit. So it's got black fruit. There's blackberry vines kind of lining the edges of this. We have to kind of fight them back a little bit, but blue fruit, lots of structure. So depending on the clone, we can get quite a bit of structure off this. We also have some property in Dundee Hills and a brand new vineyard in the Van Duzer corridor, which I'm very excited about. This vineyard takes to oak really well. So typically in our winemaking, I'm like low % new oak. That's been the style. This is 50%, and that's about as high as I go. And it's about 18 months in barrel. It's a selection of 2 barrels. I do 1 neutral barrel and 1 new barrel. It's all just based on that. And this is a blend. So we only made 2 cases of it. It is just a really interesting kind of study or exhibit of the importance of place and over winemaker. So again, I would say, like, overall, I'm like, dang, this is really humbling. Just as a winemaker. So I hope you enjoy it. Cheers.
And the idea of grace and harmony is what this block brings to it?
Yeah, so the idea with grace and harmony is grace is kind of the ode to the Four Graces, to the brand. And then harmony is the idea that harmony exists on its own. You can't really create it. So this vineyard block creates its own balance.
Cool. Thank you to all 5 of you for taking us into your world and into your auction lot. I think we have time for a few questions. I don't see any questions yet on the chat, but Julia, do you have something stored up for this group?
David, we've got a couple good ones in Q&A here. First, from Richard, regarding
Oh, yeah.
Pinot and also Chardonnay, was 2018 better for one variety over the other? Interesting question. Do you want different things from vintage?
It's open to you guys.
There are some really beautiful Chardonnays out of 18, but I definitely right now I'm tending to the Pinots. I think for the structure that they bring, because it's different than the Dundee Hills sometimes gives, which is really elegant and gentle. And the tannin build and structure this year stands out to me. And so I think that for me makes the Pinot stand out in a lineup from vintage to vintage. Anyone else?
For me, this is
I
an easy
think-
one. I'm going to go Pinot Noir is definitely the standout for this over Chardonnay.
Well, I think, you know, when you have the cooler vintages, I think Chardonnay might take, for us, I think Chardonnay takes a leg up in cooler over Pinot Noir. 18, I think, you know, calling it the Goldilocks vintage before, I think, you know, there's a nice parallel, because I really loved our Chardonnay in 2018. It's probably also one of my favorites. By contrast, in very warm years, maybe I think the Pinot Noir maybe outperforms, but really hard to say because they're so lined up generally.
I would probably say for us, the Pinot was more put together in the sense that with the Chardonnay, I kept waiting for flavors to develop in the vineyard. I don't know how you guys felt, but the acid was a bit green in the vineyard and never really fell out with Chardonnay. So in the Chardonnays that I am tasting in the 18s, it's a lot more of that green apple acid instead of that roundness, where the Pinot acid just really gives it more of an energy and grace to the blends, I feel like. So I think Pinot Noir as well.
My only added comment, believe it or not, we're somewhat, I guess, newcomers or renewers to the world of Chardonnay. We took a 20-year hiatus in making Chardonnay at Cove. So we started back up about 5 years ago. And honestly, I'm very excited and have been for a while about Chardonnay kind of taking its proper place here in the Valley, you know, alongside Pinot Noir. And interestingly enough for us, and Adam will probably talk more about this when the Chardonnay tasting takes place tomorrow, is, you know, we actually leave our Chardonnay on barrel longer than we do our Pinot Noirs. And so, you know, looking, but, you know, like big punch on barrels. So I feel like where we are in terms of comparing these two, at the time, I felt like they were very cool, but honestly, we've been like probably exploring more the tasting element right now. Pinots have the Chardonnay. So I think they're equally going to be gorgeous. Maybe the Chardonnay maybe taking a little more time to express itself than like we were saying, these Pinots are like right out of the gate.
There's a follow-up question in the chat, which is, do any of you ferment in a cement egg, your Chardonnay? I don't think so.
I have before, but I don't have any at Durant. But I do like what it brings.
I always wanted to buy a bunch of cement eggs and form a hat and call it the hatchery part of the winery, just a bunch of it. I love cementation. They're so dang heavy, and I have no space. Otherwise, I'd have one.
Yeah.
They're not very portable, are they?
Yeah, we have recently acquired a couple of cement eggs, and as of yet, we've done Pinot Gris so far. So the Chardonnay, that may be a future project.
I like concrete as well. There's the egg. There's even like the pyramid shape and the tulip, and they are awesome. They're awesome fermentation. I didn't do any Chardonnay in egg though.
Julia?
Yes, there's another question in the Q&A, an interesting one from Jamie. She says, She's asking about levels of quality in the same way that the EU system has various quality designations for wine. What does that look like in the Willamette Valley? She's asking about putting various qualities under different labels, or maybe naming something different to offer variety. Is there a purpose or advantage behind that? I'm thinking about the way that many wineries in the valley will have a Willamette Valley cuvee, and then single vineyard options. But if you guys could speak to that and give Jamie some context of what that looks like for you.
Well, that's really interesting. I think, you know, the conversation about, I assume the meaning like a collective unified kind of system, rather than, you know, every winery sort of having their tiered wines. You know, I think generally that's a great idea, because I think ultimately it helps consumers, you know, and everyone kind of have an appreciation about, you know, all wineries' intention for where they feel that wine should fall. In reality, making that happen is probably a bit trickier.
Oh, having another governing body dictate where your wine falls in quality sounds like a waking nightmare to me.
Right.
Let's just subject our wines to another degree of criticism. Sounds lovely.
Though,
I get it for the
maybe
consumer, though.
in the Willamette Valley, I mean, I know at Chehalem and maybe Elk Cove and all of us really, our flagship tier is made to be more approachable. So the average consumer can taste it and purchase it without, you know, spending an arm and a leg. Where once you get a little past that, we have 3 estate vineyards. And so we do a single vineyard where we really like to showcase the soil. So there is, I feel like in the Willamette Valley, a thread in the sense, like all you guys have talked about AVAs and how important that is in the Oregon industry. So anyone that's listening could probably contact us and go, hey, you talked about Laurelwood soil. Like, I'd love to learn more about that, but I don't even know if I like Chehalem wine. So I'm going to buy, you know, our $20 Pinot and then get really nerdy about it. I don't know if you guys would agree or not agree, but in general, we just want people to want to like Oregon wine.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, for us, really a state vineyard, and like I said, we are very focused on block and clonal designates. So we really don't have tiers. We just have our blocks, and so each vintage and each block wine is a phenomenal snapshot of the vintage and what that clone and title bring in that vintage. So we're pretty even across the board that we don't have tiered wines, because it's all off the estate and it's all individual blocks. And so I hope all of our wines can give a snapshot of the vintage and the each different clone.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie's suggesting that that wasn't exactly what she was. Oh, what happened to her follow-up question?
Oh, David, I sent her a brief explanation, and I did not realize that would make it disappear. But yeah, she was asking about kind of second label versus, and whether you can do that every year or vintage based.
Well, in terms of second label or tiers in that regard, we do have a sister winery at Elk Cove that we launched about 5 years ago called Pike Road, and for us that is definitely tiered. And one of the things about its creation really coincided or is a direct result of us going back to 100% estate grown. And you know, part of the rationale there was not sort of walking away from the growers that we had relationships with for 2 decades or more. And so we opted to create a separate brand with those relationships and some of our young vine stuff. And so it is tiered, more readily available, more approachable. you know, it also allows us to be even more selective in, you know, when we're going to make up even our basic cuvee for Cove, in really refining that barrel blend, if you will, and allowing that to be the very best representation of the Willamette Valley across our vineyards. And you know, I'm an analogy person, and I love to say that it's like, you know, when you first meet someone, first impressions, they're really important. So for us, I kind of feel like our Willamette Valley Pinot Noir is our flagship and most important wine, because 90% of the time that's how people meet us. So it's a really big focus for us at the winery.
Sure. I don't like the idea of tiers necessarily as something that doesn't make a higher tier is going to just go into the Willamette Valley, because like Shirley said, that's probably what people are going to be most familiar with. So I like that freedom to make those blends. The Willamette Valley, for our blend, I'm trying to highlight the best characters of our estate vineyards. And then if somebody wants to focus in, they go, oh, I want to try the difference between Yamhill and the Van Duzer corridor. Then they go to those AVAs or even estates, and then they can dig into that and say, ooh, I really love the differences I get in the Yamhill Carlton or Dundee, and they can taste those. And I think that's really exciting. So in terms of quality, you can't really, I don't like to make that. I mean, some people are Dundee folks. Some people are Yamhill Carlton, different personalities. Willamette Valley, so that our flagship wine in that way is going to represent those. And so what I'm hoping is that when somebody tastes those wines, they go, oh, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot because of the diversity in the sites that goes into that.
Good. Is there a short question that we've got? I don't think so. Is there, Julia?
No, we don't have any more Q&As in the chat. I could certainly ask a question or two if we have a minute.
I think we're sort of running out of time, in fact. I wanted to make the point that this year's auction, being virtual, is very different from the in-person auctions we've done for the last 4 years for some obvious reasons, and for one not so obvious reason, and that is that we felt that this year was special for because so many people have been affected by COVID, not just in having to do Zoom, but restaurants have been literally forced to suspend operation, and the net effect has been the loss of businesses and many restaurants that may never reopen. We felt that in this year's auction that it made some sense to recognize the unique world that COVID has imposed on all of us, particularly those wineries that sell a lot to restaurants are also affected. But we felt that choosing to work with the James Beard Foundation gave us a special impetus, because they've created a new fund this year that in essence is a ongoing fund to benefit Black and Indigenous peoples of North America, food and beverage businesses that are owned by these peoples. And this is obviously not only a COVID issue, but also what's happened after George Floyd, and the recognition that that the James Beard Foundation and by derivation Willamette Valley wineries are given to the special problems that exist among people who have not been widely supported in the past. So it's a great opportunity for this auction to be not only funding the amazing work of the Willamette Valley Wineries Association as it has done in the past, but also as bids go beyond the opening bids, for that money, in fact, to go to the James Beard Foundation, to this special fund. So with that, I'd like to thank our 5 panelists. This has been an amazingly interesting and intriguing bit of an hour. I thank you for your time and for your great thinking and quite intense thinking about this Goldilocks vintage to pick that term. So thanks to you all. Back over to you, Julia.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much, panelists, for a wonderful hour together.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you, attendees, for joining us today. I have dropped the auction link in the chat again. If you are trade, you haven't yet registered to bid, I dropped the link there as well. We hope you'll join us next week, August 11th, 12th, and 13th, with a live close on August 13th. We'll see you at the auction, and thanks, everybody. Cheers.
By the way, that live close starts at noon Pacific time, so at 3 p.m. Eastern time, with Fritz Hatton, our auctioneer for the last 4 years. It's going to be crazy, I'll tell you that.
Woohoo!
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thanks.